The Trip. Chapter 5. Charlotte. The boardroom didn't empty so much as exhale. Chairs were pushed in with the kind of care that pretends to be respect. Condensation rings on the table mapped where certainty had sat and sweated. On the wall, someone forgot to kill the screen share. A slide hung there with the word integration so large it read like a threat. Charlotte stayed until the door closed on the last courteous smile. She turned the monitor off and watched the room fall back into its actual size. Her phone vibrated across the wood. Marcus, how close are you, really? She set the phone down, face up. The message glowed like a flare. Close to what? To Strategia Holdings? To capitulation? To being right for the wrong reasons? She opened messages and typed what she'd already decided in the meeting. The sentence measured against 3 different outcomes. Sent. Got your deck. Call me tonight. Some of it works, some of it doesn't. She slid the phone away and let the room go still. Pacing is part of the content. Outside, Feedy was between lights, the hour when glass is not day and not night, when reflections argue with themselves. Charlotte rode the elevator down with 2 analysts who carried identical keyboards in identical backpacks. One whispered, "We're aligned," as if saying it made it true. The elevator hummed its non-committal reply. On the street, a vendor closed a briefcase of counterfeit cufflinks with the efficiency of a magician. A woman in heels counted steps between crosswalk lines like they were units of control. A man rehearsed a speech into his AirPods using a voice meant for someone else's board. Charlotte cut east, past a lobby where a living wall tried to convince concrete it was human. The river was a block away, hidden by geometry and optimism. She didn't need to see it. Knowing it was there kept the city honest. Her screen flashed. Call from Stockholm, Sweden. She took the call without stopping. "Hey." "Good evening," said the voice, polished, deferential, and slightly tired. "We read the announcement." "Congratulations." "It wasn't an announcement," she said. "It was a stress test." A beat. She could hear him shifting papers to buy himself a second. And the result? "Everyone passed the part they wrote for themselves," she said. He tried a gentler tactic. "What do you need?" "Unsentimentality," Charlotte said, "and weekend time before anyone remembers how to posture." "Strategia Holdings doesn't forget," he said. "That's fine," she replied. "I'm counting on what they remember wrong." They spoke another minute in the way people do who both know a third party is present without being on the line. When she hung up, she had 2 notes. He was comfortable with risk as long as it was procedural, and he'd already been told to call her proactive in any email that circulated. Back in the Oris lobby, the receptionist's smile was professionally warm, eyes already past her to the next arrival. Charlotte collected the folder she'd left at security, printouts because certain arguments demanded paper, and stepped back onto the street, this time heading north. She preferred to bleed Feedy off on foot, let the tower air leave her system before the subway could sell her everyone else's mood. A man in a wool coat argued into the wind about a dataset. A courier threaded a rolling suitcase through a knot of tourists who had chosen the exact wrong corner to decide where to eat. A child pressed his hand to a polished granite plinth and left a star of fingerprints that looked like punctuation. Greenpoint was a different country by the time she reached it. Light falling slower, voices lower, the avenues organizing themselves into a grid that tolerated improvisation. Her building's stairwell had the faint smell of dust and dish soap that no one could ever get rid of. Inside the loft, quiet that arrived without asking for attention. Pale wood, clean lines, a desk too long for a person who didn't collect clutter. She washed her hands, then kept the faucet running a heartbeat too long. Her mother had called it finishing the thought. Waste as punctuation, discipline as answer. On the desk waited the notebook, thick paper, narrow lines, the kind that turned decisions into instruments. She opened a fresh page and drew 3 rectangles with a single pen stroke each. Merge, resist, pivot. Arrows between them, not symmetrical. Power never is. She wrote beneath merge, capital, coverage, calendar. Beneath resist, narrative, penalty, spine. Beneath pivot, truth. We haven't told ourselves yet. Her phone slid across the wood with a new weight. Nora Garvey, a person who specialized in saying things that sounded like compliments and behaved like leverage. She let it go to mist, then watched the transcript land. We should talk. Your orbit is shifting. She ate at the counter, crisp bread, butter, radishes shaved thin, smoked salt so light it dissolved before she could taste it if she wasn't paying attention. Paying attention was half of eating anyway. The other half was permission. The city had gone to outlines. The river wrote cursive where the ferry wakes crossed and misread themselves. She stood by the window and let the view draw great circles around every decision she hadn't made yet. Delay has a reputation it doesn't always deserve. Sometimes it's not fear, it's staging. At 10 p.m., the Marcus call came. She answered on the second ring. Charlotte, he said, too fast, like the name was a ramp. Marcus, she said, flat enough to become level. The deck has a spine, she said, and a costume. He went quiet. He heard it. Sovereignty, he asked, trying to land on the page he wanted her to like. You're treating electricity like a flag, she said. Investors don't salute. A breath on his end, then a short laugh that had nowhere to hide. You're right. I'm useful, she corrected. He took it. Tell me where it breaks. Slide 5 pretends risk is friction, not exposure. Slide 12 asks for belief instead of terms. The rest wants to be a manifesto. I can fix that. Fix the posture, not the adjectives. Another thin silence. In it, she could hear him choosing what to keep pride over. Pride is a variable. You can solve for it if you name it correctly. Strategenia Holdings reached out again, he said. A dinner. They don't do dinners, she said. They do tests with an entree. So I go. You go, she said. You don't perform. And you don't let them perform you. He laughed. Softer this time. They hovered at the edge where professional and personal shake hands and pretend not to notice. She didn't step over it. She didn't step back. Distance has many uses. Intimacy has fewer than people think. Send me the revision by noon, she said, and take the word independence out of the title. You haven't earned it yet. Yet, he echoed. She hung up first, not as a move, as punctuation. The loft returned to its lower heartbeat. She flipped the notebook and added a 4th entry in smaller script, a line you only drew if you were willing to look like you'd planned it all along. Decoy. Let the market believe merge while negotiating pivot. Harvest the terms of one to fund the other. Requires a weekend, a rumor, and 3 people who know how not to blink. Her phone ticked. Colony again, a fragment from earlier that someone had just reacted to. Camille. Thursday. Same booth. A late checkmark from Ethan. Alice added a champagne emoji, which meant celebration or warning depending on the hour. Daniel remained a rectangle without content. Charlotte closed the book. The river kept its unbothered tempo. In the glass, her face was a clean line that gave nothing away she didn't intend to. She turned the lights off with one touch, leaving the room's shape to remember itself. Across the water, Lower Manhattan glowed like a diagram. She felt no need to solve it tonight. Schedule would. The email sat in drafts like a live wire. Subject, weekend window. Terms. Body, we need 48 hours without external comms. No press, no alignment notes. If Strategenia Holdings wants proximity, they can show restraint. She didn't send it. She closed the laptop and let the room darken to the point where objects remembered their edges without her. A message sent at midnight performed urgency. A message sent at 6:12 a.m. performed control. She preferred the second. By the time she reached Fidi, the morning had put its gloss back on steel. Inside Aris, the air smelled faintly of machines that had been told to be quiet. She moved past reception with the nod that says, hello, and also says, nothing is wrong. The meeting wasn't on the calendar, which meant it mattered. Small table, shades half drawn, the USGM with carefully arranged sincerity, legal with a folder thicker than it needed to be, ops with a spreadsheet that could pass for offense, and on the screen, 2 time zones away, a Stratenia Holdings liaison with the kind of haircut that tells you he hasn't stood in a line in a decade. We're excited, the GM said, which is what people say when they're afraid of being asked a real question. Great, Charlotte said, which is what you say when you intend to ask one. Slide 3 renamed dependency as mutual acceleration. Slide 7 turned exclusivity into clarity of motion. Charlotte let them stack the language the way you let a child stack blocks, not to stop them, but to see which one they think is load-bearing. When the liaison began using the phrase operational humility, she leaned back just enough that the camera would read it as comfort, not recoil. What's the control surface? She asked. He smiled into his own reflection. Shared. Which is to say yours, Charlotte said. A long blink. Legal glanced down. Ops pretended to scroll. The GM cleared his throat. We should talk about pilot parameters. We should talk about who defines success, Charlotte said, and left the sentence in the room long enough for it to grow teeth. The liaison's smile didn't entirely break. We're aligned on outcomes. Aligned outcomes with asymmetric levers are theater, she said. We're not staging this. Silence, measured. She didn't fill it. People show you where their fear lives if you give it oxygen. Ops slid a sheet across the table to her, almost grateful for a domestic transaction. Sandbox, metrics, a weekend freeze on public statements. It was passed off as implementation detail. It was, in fact, a gate. She tapped the margin with her thumb. This is the only sentence that matters today, she said. No one disagreed in words. The liaison nodded once, the way people do when they've lost a piece and want it to look like they sacrificed it. After, the GM let the door close with a softness that was supposed to read as collegial. That was direct, he said. It was specific, she replied. He smiled like he'd survived something and wanted credit. We're lucky to have you. We're lucky if we keep terms, she said, not smiling. Back at her desk, she sent the email that had slept in drafts, now dressed in the daytime authority. The out-of-office replies from Europe ticked in like a polite metronome. She turned notifications off. People mistake visibility for influence. She never did. Nora Garvey met her near the elevators, which meant Nora had counted the stops and the angles. Charcoal suit, the new haircut, a face that had read in every camera it wanted to. Charlotte, Nora said, like the 2 syllables contained subtext and history they did not in fact share. We almost overlapped last spring. We overlapped in concept, Charlotte said. A flash of appreciation crossed Nora's face, or calculation that looked like it. I like how you move language, Nora said. You sell it, Charlotte replied. Only when it's cheaper than truth. Nora smiled. May I steal 10 minutes, or do we do this by a calendar and myth? They stepped into a side lounge that pretended to be neutral by being expensive. Nora didn't sit. Smart. People are weaker when they commit to furniture. Your orbit is shifting, Nora said, reprising her text without blinking. I advise people whose orbits shift. Quietly. Quiet is a prosthetic, Charlotte said. Useful when something's broken. Nora's eyes warmed. A performance of warmth, but convincing. You're not broken. You're deciding whether to play a game you can't admit you don't like. Charlotte waited. I have funders who reward restraint, Nora said. If Oris wants to be seen as the adult in the room, we can make sure the room notices. Adults don't need the room, Charlotte said. They need terms. Terms come with narrative, Nora said. You know that. You're writing one. Charlotte let the compliment pass without purchasing it. What do you actually want? To be useful, Nora said, and to be close enough to truth that I can charge for it. Send me the part that isn't a pitch, Charlotte said. I'll read it. Nora tilted her head, the millimeter that separates charm from respect. You're not easy. I'm not available, Charlotte said. They parted on a nod that would play as mutual to any camera that wasn't there. In the elevator, Charlotte watched the floor numbers descend and thought about people who introduce themselves as solutions. Problems have better posture. She didn't go back upstairs. She walked east until the towers ran out of room to posture as sky. On a bench by the water, a man in a jacket that could pay 3 months' rent ate an orange as if he'd discovered citrus. She set her phone on the bench beside her and didn't touch it for long enough that not touching became the act. At 7:20, she let Greenpoint take her back. Not to the loft, not yet. She stopped at Troost on Manhattan Avenue, a small, softly lit neighborhood bar. The bartender poured a white that didn't fight the air. Long day? He asked, the way people do when they've decided you won't punish them for asking. Accurate day, she said. He nodded as if that was a category he stocked. A couple to her left circled a fight and never landed it. A trio of programmers at a table behind her tried to parse loyalty like it could be diagrammed. Charlotte watched the edges of each conversation rather than the centers. Centers perform. Her phone buzzed, face down. She didn't flip it. Instead, she took the folded notebook from her bag and opened to the page she'd marked with a torn receipt. Merge/resist/pivot/decoy. Arrows like weather fronts. She added 2 small marks no one else would read as letters. R near decoy for rumor. W near pivot for weekend. The bartender set a small plate of almonds down without comment. Someone once taught him that salt is a kindness that costs nothing. She thought of her father again, not the man at the head of tables, but the man by the coat rack after everyone left, folding sleeves back into themselves with an attention so exact it looked like prayer. He'd said once, with a smile that wasn't for her, "Patience is not delay. It's choreography." She had been 12, and she understood only the rhythm. Now she owned the rest. Back home, the loft felt aligned by absence. She didn't turn on the overhead. She clicked the lamp by the desk and let the cone of light explain what mattered. On the sill, the small plant had turned a degree toward the colder window. Even instinct could be elegant. Her screen woke. Marcus had sent the revision. No subject line, just the file. It was cleaner. Less performance. Slide 5 no longer lied. It asked a better question. Slide 12 replaced belief with terms. The sovereignty language was gone. He had removed an adjective she hadn't told him to. She allowed herself the faint, private satisfaction reserved for evidence that someone listened at the pace you set. She sent back 5 lines, none of them praise, all of them useful. Noon tomorrow still hung in the previous message like a finish line. She didn't move it. Charlotte placed the phone on the notebook so the glass hid the ink. 2 kinds of record, one on top of the other. She stood at the window and watched a plane bank above the harbor, turning its belly toward the city before it trusted the runway. Everyone was performing competence for someone. Only a few were competent. She tried to be both. The night thinned. She let herself think about nothing for the duration of one song, not playing, just remembered. The way you sometimes hear music through a wall and decide it's enough. When she turned from the window, the apartment felt like an answer she hadn't asked yet. Part of her wanted to call Stockholm back and tell them what fear looked like in an American boardroom. Part of her wanted to say nothing and let the weekend do its work. She chose the second. Her phone buzzed once more. Ethan liked an older message of hers in the thread, out of sequence, as if he'd finally caught up with a feeling he'd outrun all day. Alice added a knife emoji to something Marcus had sent 3 hours ago that had nothing to do with knives. Daniel remained a presence you could see only by the shadow he didn't cast. Charlotte turned the lamp off. The notebook kept its weather in the dark. Out the window, the city balanced on its own choreography. Cranes stalled mid-gesture. Office floors lit like test patterns, the river writing long sentences no one could read from here. She didn't decide. She didn't have to. Decision has a vanity to it. Timing has none. Wednesday was built for staging. Friday could have the theater. Charlotte preferred engineering. At 4:26 p.m., she walked a loop of the Oris floor that looked casual and served as reconnaissance. Ops had their jackets on chairbacks. Legal was pretending not to watch the clock. Across the glass, the GM rehearsed a smile in the reflection of a muted screen. The building's air felt like it had been cleaned twice. On her desk, Nora's promised "not a pitch" sat in her inbox. 3 bullet points that were, in fact, not a pitch. Weekend discipline buys leverage. Call your silence. Feed a decoy line to contain speculation. Charlotte didn't reply. She'd already built the same shape on paper the night before. 4:41. She sent 2 emails. First, to the integration distro. Tight list, no all-at laziness. Subject: Weekend freeze. Pilot comms. We're holding a 48-hour quiet window on pilot language. No external statements, no alignment notes beyond ops tickets. If you're asked for color, the answer is scheduling. If scheduling escalates, escalate to me. Second, to the Strategia Holdings liaison. Private. Subject: Control surface. We'll proceed on sandbox and success criteria if we agree the control surface is shared in implementation and audit. If that's a yes, I'll confirm Monday. If it's a no, we'll pause without announcement. She scheduled both for Friday, 4:57 p.m., the quiet hour when urgency reads as control, and closed the laptop with a small click that felt like punctuation. In the elevator, she watched a man in a navy suit pretend not to stare at himself. At street level, Feedy had slipped into its casual costume. Ties loosened, bad jokes aired like currency, a gull lifting off a trash can with more grace than any of it deserved. She didn't go home. She cut east and took the ferry north, the deck half empty, the river throwing up the occasional cold mist that made everyone perform laughter. She didn't check her phone. Greenpoint met her with a sky that hadn't decided what color to be, storefronts already switching from coffee to wine. She stopped at a print shop still open out of habit and stubbornness. Inside, the owner fed her PDF into a machine the size of an appliance store and said nothing as the pages slid out. The pilot success criteria, the freeze note, a 1-page explainer for someone who would never admit they needed it. She paid in cash because it made paper feel like paper. At home, she spread the pages on the long desk like a map of weather systems she'd chosen. The plant on the sill had leaned another degree toward the window. The room held a clean, anticipatory quiet. Her phone buzzed once. The Strategia Holdings liaison. Shared in implementation, audit scope limited to predefined metrics. Monday is fine. No emojis, no hedging. Good. He believed he'd kept something. He had. He'd kept his posture. Another buzz. Nora. The freeze before Monday is right. Charlotte didn't answer. Praise was a resource. She didn't spend it on people for whom it was inventory. She ate, standing. Apple, cheese, 2 crackers snapped into exact halves. Precision wasn't an affect. It was a habit that kept other habits honest. When she finally opened the colony thread, it had evolved without her. Ethan was pretending not to manage everyone. Alice had adopted the tone she used when she was guarding an interior she'd never admit existed. Camille had added a photo of a stairwell light in a museum that made sense only if you liked light. Daniel had added nothing but the read receipt. She took it as proof of life. 7:03. Her phone rang with the Sweden tone she never changed. She let it go twice. "Good evening," said Stockholm, almost cheerful. That meant someone had told him not to sound concerned. "We have the window," Charlotte said, "and we have the word shared attached to something that matters." "That's quite a lot," he said. "It's enough," she said, "for the weekend." "Will there be noise?" "There will be performance," she said. "Noise if we let it." A pause that wanted to be trust. She didn't help it along. "Anything else?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "If anyone asks what we're doing, we say scheduling, not alignment, not pilot. The word is scheduling." "Scheduling," he repeated as if trying it on. They signed off with a neutrality that wouldn't fracture under reread. She wrote shed in small letters near the decoy line on her notebook and underlined it once. 8:11, Marcus called without texting first, which meant urgency or momentum. She took it. "I cut the manifestos," he said by way of greeting. "Kept the skeleton." "You were right about 5. "Send it," she said. "It's sent." She refreshed nothing. "How was the dinner?" "They tested." "I didn't perform." And they nodded like they'd already decided something in a different room. "Then the room exists," she said. "Good." He was quiet long enough for New York to become audible between them, a distant siren, a burst of laughter from a street that belonged to people younger than both of them. "Are you—" he started, then stopped. New question. "Why do you help me like this?" She looked at the desk, at the arrows that didn't need her eyes to hold their shape. "Because you run hotter than the grid, and you're building something that can't survive that," she said. "Because leverage is real and romance is expensive. And because if you're going to sell the future, I'd rather it be someone who knows the difference." He made a sound that wasn't gratitude and wasn't not. "See you Thursday?" "Yes," she said, and let the word be simple. After they hung up, she opened his file. Slide 5 now read like a question worth money. Slide 12 had swapped belief for milestones with teeth. The title was modest. He'd learned something. She wrote send in the margin of her mind and set the laptop to sleep. At 10:02, the Strategia Holdings liaison sent a single line. "Monday 9:30 to confirm." She replied, "Confirmed, no more." The rest of the chessboard could wait until all the pieces remembered they were pieces. She put the phone face down, then turned it over again. Daniel's name hovered in her contacts without a dot beside it. She considered sending nothing. She considered sending a link to a public filing he would have found anyway. Instead, she sent 6 words that looked like courtesy and weren't. "Watch Midtown on Monday. Success criteria." No emoji, no source. He wouldn't ask. He'd file the datum in that card catalog he carried in his head and let the pattern find it. The city outside had gone to the version of night that feels like held breath. She left the desk and laid the notebook on the floor, 4 quadrants open like a plan she could walk into. Merge sat heavy, resist sharp, pivot lean, decoy small and aggressive. She stood over them and pictured the weekend moving without her. Emails bouncing off out of offices, a liaison sleeping with his phone face down, a GM practicing gratitude in a mirror, Nora tuning her attention like an instrument. Pacing would do its quiet violence. She closed the notebook and slid it onto the lowest shelf of the bookcase, spines turned inward. Secrets didn't need drama. They needed storage. She turned off the lamp and let the room hold its shape in the dark. Monday would arrive on schedule. That was the design.